6 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I love the segments that we have where we have an author who has developed the skill of storytelling. It's always a delight for me. And hey, it's a cooler than normal day here in Central Florida. You might want to go get a copy of the book we're going to talk about. It's called Timeless Travels, Tales of Mystery, Intrigue, Humor, and Enchantment. Joseph Rotenberg is on the phone. He's an attorney, a senior vice president for a financial firm in Paramus, New Jersey. He visited Israel over 30 times. He lived in Jerusalem for several years. There was a story this morning about they changed the way they determine things in Jerusalem now, or something. Yeah, it's the whole scene is constantly changing, and always a curiosity for those of us who are concerned about the welfare of the planet. Joseph attended the Hebrew University in Givat Ram. Hope I'm saying that right. And again, his book is called Timeless Travels. Good morning, Joseph.
Good morning to you. I just listened to your weather report, and what you call chilly, where we are in Arctic, New Jersey, I'll take 49 to 64 in the zone.
What's up?
Over the zero with wind chill that we've been facing currently.
So what is it right now?
They're probably 16, 18, without factoring in the wind. Yeah. That's Fahrenheit, not Florida weather. I'm reminded of the commercials from the 1960s. You know, the orange juice commercials. Come on down.
Right. We must be the same age. I grew up in New York. Also, I remember those commercials. Also, before I moved to Florida, I pictured bikinis and beaches all the time. It didn't turn out.
Oh, for sure.
Didn't turn out that way.
Right. Well. We're managing. Hopefully, it'll warm up to 49.
Do you know one of the things that that happened after moving to Florida was that because I do a radio show, I become friends with a lot of people who reenact things. Like they reenact. Recently, we went to a reenactment of a Seminole War thing. So you have this whole tradition of the indigenous peoples telling stories and your stories are almost exactly like that, except you have different stories. The idea of telling stories so that we don't forget what happened in the past, and in such a profound way, is this is this at the core of you? Is that who you are in your core? It's a
reflection of it took 60 odd years to come out of me. Right, I was always in love with the short story genre. I was fortunate enough, my dad would tell stories about it, and they're included in the book, escaping, these movies that just came out about Dunkirk. This was his war experience, being in the Belgian army at the beginning of World War II. And he was a wonderful storyteller. And in a way, the book by Ray Bradbury also influenced me, Fahrenheit 451, I believe, which was told how each individual became a book itself, right? They in a world where in a futuristic world where books were not permitted, they were burned literally. Every person became a book, and that's the way I view the world. That each of us has our own stories to tell. We don't always get the opportunity to do that, but that's at the core. A desire to one section of my book is called "Observations of an Ordinary Man." I consider myself an ordinary Joe.
Oh, but
anybody.
But it is the observations part that I'm impressed with. It is almost as if we've heard a story before, but you observed something about that story that I never heard or never noticed or never put importance to. One that comes to mind is the bronze statue, I think it was, after the bombing of Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm. Right. That was juxtaposing a walk on Upper Riverside Drive. Those who know Manhattan, it's a very almost pastoral section of Manhattan. None of the hustle or bustle. But I would get a fright passing by this Buddhist statue because it was a forbidding statue. And only subsequently, decades later, did I read the history of the statue. How it got there, and that it was a survivor of the Hiroshima blast. I mean, it was it was definitely the stuff from which a story could be written, and hopefully I made an effective.
Yeah, and I think you did make an effective. I don't know what the next word would be. You made an effective impression, I guess, maybe on me, because you hear the logic behind. I don't want to stick with that one story, but you hear about the logic that was used to justify dropping the bomb. It's going to save lives, etc. But as you put in the story, to the man on the street, that didn't matter, because guess what? His life is done. Not basically done, but is done. Yeah.
Right. I hope every reader of my book takes your approach. Obviously, you're experienced in reading a number of books, so
yeah.
I think you caught the essence of it.
You are also a humorist.
Yeah, that's just been part. I think that's a defensive part of my personality. The old issue of self-deprecation, right? Self-deprecatory humor, laughing at yourself before other people do, before they discover that side of one's nature, is something that's motivated me my entire life. But I'm excited about it. As a matter of fact, the book was just selected by indie readers as one of the best reviewed books of 2017. That's something that
good job.
So somebody liked it out there, and critically, it's been well accepted. I think people will enjoy it, no matter what their ethnicity, religion is.
I think so too. I mean, look how well received Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld are. It's observational on their part too. On their part, they focus more on the humorous observations, and you don't shy away from that either. Could you have gone in that direction?
I believe so. There's a lot that I identify with in the two gentlemen you mentioned. I consider them major, obviously, as you call it, observational humor. There's so much in our life experiences. You can look at the negatives all the time, but humor helps to lighten it. It's sort of the yeast that makes everything fluffier, I guess, and warmer, even in winter.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the people that say the Holocaust never happened?
It's very interesting that you raised that question, because I can take it from the universal, the idea that look at the enormity of such a crime, 6 million people, and that's just the Jewish people, not to mention millions and millions of other people, of other ethnicities. But I look at it simply as I can take it from one grandmother, my grandmother, my father's mother, who was a patriotic 50-ish-year-old Belgian citizen, as I say, sent her sons off to fight for her country, being kidnapped, dragged 800 miles away from her home and gassed. I mean, just think about that. That's just one person. So I can view World War II from a very particular level, from my, from the eye level. So what people say it didn't exist? Well, they can't account. And the Germans recorded the death of my grandmother. So, I mean, why would they bother? Simply anonymous.
I don't understand that either. I don't understand what the point is of trying to say something that's so documented that didn't happen. I mean, the wisdom of Eisenhower to have photographs, as horrible as they were, he said take photographs, and his whole reason was so we don't forget.
No, absolutely, and whatever group has the position of power and uses, as I write, their technology, their wisdom, their intelligence, as the German people did at that time, simply to destroy blameless souls because they could do it. They use their technology, for a very negative purpose.
Right, and the fear, or here's what I can relate to something you said. You said earlier about the statue, the Buddhist statue, that you didn't read the inscription until you were much older. The same thing happened to me. There was a statue of Chief Osceola, one of the Indian chiefs here in Florida. Yeah, and I must have passed it 100 times or more. And then one day I read it, and it basically says that they were forced to move to Oklahoma. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, his people lived here forever. And then we decided, you can't live here anymore. You got to move. There's no cars. There's no cars. We're going to send you, not to the next town. We're going to send you to Oklahoma. I don't know how far. It's got to be 1,000 miles. It's unbelievable.
Right. You can add also to the to the Osceola situation, the Christian farmers in Alabama and in the Carolinas who were moved out similarly, in the was it the Trail of Tears in the wintertime, with spring clothing, to Oklahoma as well.
Yeah.
Land grabs. Well, land grabs have been going on since the beginning of time, since the Cro-Magnons probably moved the Neanderthals out in the cave days. It takes a lot when you have the power not to abuse it. It's a lot of times it's just circumstances that give you that power, that ascendancy.
Are you surprised that your stories are pulling out these kinds of realizations from your readers? Are they like, I get what he's saying. Even though you're a great storyteller, are you surprised that there are underlying messages that people are actually perceiving?
Yes, I'm not. I'm surprised to some extent, but it depends on the reader's observational skills as well. As I say, I don't think I have cornered the market on these kind of observations.
Right. Yeah.
I think we all make them, and it's that theory. There was a program on public TV about connections, right? Making those connections, juxtaposing, a Jewish peddler who befriends he's captured initially by Comanches back in Oklahoma, and decades later, generations later, a Comanche born, or at least part Comanche gentleman goes to divinity school and starts giving Bible lessons on the YouTube. I mean, that's one of the stories. It's called Torah and Teepees.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
Comanche. It resonated so far that in San Diego, the Western Historical Society wanted to reprint the story, thinking that the entire story was true. I hypothesized the meeting between the Jewish gentleman and the chief. The chief did exist. His great-great-grandson was a real character. So I mix. It's a multi-genre book, obviously, that covers historical fiction, creative nonfiction, as well as pure fiction. And I actually, in the back of the book, break it down. So
sometimes people define nationalities and attach religion to it. Like, do you hear like Russian Jews and American Jews and that type of thing?
Well, I mean, that's an element in the historical culture. I mean, it's a fact that there were different. The Judaism became the first mobile, just to use the cell phone analogy. Mm-hmm. When the Romans destroyed the Second Temple back in, I think, the year 70. At that time, obviously, the temple was a place where sacrifices. There was a sacrificial cult. That's what the prayers consisted of. And what happened was someone got the idea to have prayers substitute for those sacrifices, and but yet Jews have the different, as I say, different subsections. There's the Ashkenazic Jews who are centered in Central Europe, and the Spanish Mediterranean Jews, the Sephardic groups. These groups continue into modern times. So there are, even within ethnicities, maybe I'm not understanding your question clearly, but there are subgroups, and in the Jewish case, it is based on religious lines as well.
I think the common denominator is the state of human existence. In your book, the observations are either on human survival, or sometimes human unkindness or human kindness. They all surface and kind of tell the story. And I think through the Jewish perspective, the non-Jewish person gets to see it almost through the eyes of a Jewish person. But in your case, I mean, you really do bring in many different types of people into these stories. So it's not just all about...
That was the goal, anyway. That was the... I set out to to make it as to show the universal, right, in the particular story of American Jews and the land of Israel. And I have pieces which describe an experience I had in Gaza as a 17-year-old, where right after the Six-Day War, the Israeli soldiers and Israelis were greeted as liberators by the Gazans, who today are probably in the forefront of the Hamas.
Which is weird.
The notion was, and people very quickly in the Middle East, the sands of the desert can cover up major achievements very rapidly, and the notion was that the liberation was coming from the Egyptian overlordship that existed, from 1948 to 1967, and the Gazans were very happy to see the Egyptians gone. Now, sure. I pointed out that there was a moment in time that could have maybe developed differently than, in fact, it has sadly developed. But it did exist. I'm an eyewitness to that. These are the experiences where I was fortunate to be at a particular spot, at a particular time. But as I say, my experience, I hope and I pray, is not just unique to me. But it truly is universal, and even though I write about one ethnic group, the lessons are there for all ethnic groups, and
right, and absolutely right. And throughout history, as doing a talk show, especially doing a talk show that ends up with podcasts on YouTube where people can leave comments.
I was going to ask you whether I can actually listen to myself. No.
Yeah, we'll be able to. But the thing I wanted to say is that under the comments, I don't always get positive feedback about my role as a host. And one of the things people will always say about me is that I'm an apologist. So when I talk about how we chased the Indians out to Oklahoma, you're just another white apologist, or whatever they call me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I said, what do you mean I'm an apologist? This is the truth of history, and we need to know it so that we don't repeat it. And if you share history with skillful storytelling, it's going to resonate with young readers with open minds, because obviously the old people with closed minds are never going to change their mind anyway.
Well, I felt when I read some of the criticism or the critiques of my book, and thankfully I was getting like 5-star reviews. Not that I was shooting for that, but critically the readers picked up on the points you make, that I reach out to the public at large. I felt my book would be of value to philo-Semites and anti-Semites. In other words, I attempted to present what I consider to be a true representation of the diversity of the Jewish experience. We all like to pigeonhole groups, and say, well, these people are like this, and these people are like that. And the reality is, we start as individuals. I'm blessed with like 10 grandchildren, okay, and they're so diverse. But to me, the universal is when they smile at Grandpa. That's the greatest, warmest feeling. Or when a person comes over to you at a family affair or a wedding, right, situation, and they'll come up and say to you, "Your grandson, oh, he's so sweet," or "He's so wonderful." And he's going to be complex, or she is going to be, will have issues growing up like anybody else.
Yeah.
But this is across the line. This is part of being a human being. It's that
right,
in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And the food seems to be the most uniting thing that bridges gaps between different cultures, and that to me is extremely amazing.
No, I actually, I don't know what brought me to write a story where I attended Columbia College as my undergraduate school here in New York, and I have two Morningside teachers deciding on entering a contest to determine what the most popular dish is in the world, just across all world cuisines. And they're debating whether it was something like pizza, but they had to eliminate the entire Orient, which doesn't eat dairy classically. Mm-hmm. You don't have those menus. And the irony is that I believe they chose something like chicken soup or broth, which came in second. It actually was stuffed cabbage, some form of ground beef, which you put in a leaf boil it, and apparently there are like 60 cuisines worldwide that have some form of a stuffed cabbage. It's just bottom line is though that there's a great sharing. There's a Jewish dish. I'm sure some Floridians are familiar with gefilte fish, right?
Don't even try.
Right.
No.
But what I discovered in my research was that among Polish Catholic people on Easter and on Christmas, in their dinner, they serve gefilte fish, and in Polish, you know what the name of gefilte fish is?
No.
Jewish carp. Jewish carp.
Isn't that something?
Really?
Wow.
Yes, in the Polish language.
Well,
I mean, I don't speak Polish
I
fluently, but
I can't even see a fish in a gefilte fish. I don't even see a fish. I just look like it looks
Right.
like something somebody coughed up. I don't even know what that is. It's horrible.
No, I'm saying, look, I'll put it as an acquired taste. And when you're brought up in a home like I was, you were fed it early
Did you
and
like
often.
it?
So,
Really?
well, my mother made the sweet version. Certain areas make a more peppery type, but
So here's my funny story. I got a funny
crossover.
I'm sorry, I'm
Okay.
talking over you. This is nothing I get criticized for, talking over. I apologize for that. I'm so sorry. So anyway, for my funny story, I'm not a fisherman, but I would go fishing with my son and my two nephews when they were younger. And inevitably, somebody would come up and say, "What are you fishing for?" I have no idea. We're just fishing. We don't know what we're fishing. I thought it'd be funny to say gefilte fish. I'm fishing for gefilte fish. There's my funny
That's
story.
cute.
Yeah.
Yes, that would get a laugh.
Yeah.
That would get a laugh.
From you. They didn't have a laugh.
It would be encased usually in a glass jar. That would test your muscles. I actually have a story. I like to fish, though I don't get the opportunity that often. But there's one of my stories is entitled Fish Tales, Tales, and it's a story about experiences of landlubbers. I grew up in Manhattan, looking out at the Hudson, imagining where all these ships were sailing. And as I got older, I got the opportunity to fish even as far away as the North Pacific, where I caught off of Ketchikan, Alaska, supposedly the salmon canning capital of the world. I went fishing for halibut. Now, halibut are can be the size of a large conference table. They're not that easy to bring up, even if you're lucky enough to hook in them. But I was the only one, this New Jersey and Jewish guy, caught 2 large halibut. And just as I was admiring my catch, 2 Californians, you'd figure they had more dexterity, right? One of them swings his rod with a jellyfish attached and smacks me right in the face, which was wonderful. That was my experience. And to show the ironies, the book never would have been written. The ship's doctor tells me that if this would have been the Southern Pacific version of this, I might not have made it, alive back to shore.
Why?
But no. Apparently, the tentacles or whatever the
or poisonous.
yeah, they sting you. Yeah, no, they're. So I have had fishing experiences, but you'll enjoy this story, Larry, if you go back and look at it, called Fish Tales, because there are actually blessings that you're supposed to make before you go out, and when you're stuck in your party boat in 2 or 3 foot chops and waves, where you just pray that you go back to shore safely and get there.
And that's one great thing about your book is that you incorporate humor. It's very emotional, though. Some stories you really have tears for, so you do run the gamut of emotion in your book. You're an amazing writer.
I really appreciate that you took the time to read the book. I know you have busy schedules, and I hope the readers out there, it's available on Amazon. Been there for about a month, and I have a dedicated website, which is basically the name of the book with book after it. That's www.timelesstravelsbook.com, where they can read more and they can actually order the book.
Fun interview. Thank you for sharing so much of this with you. You just did my job, by the way. I didn't even have to ask you for the website and all that. That's okay. I did find the book on Amazon, and you are getting great reviews. And I'm using the cover of the book as what you see on the podcast, rather than showing Robin and myself showing the cover of the book.
Very nice.
Makes more sense to me. Joseph, thank you for being on the air with us today. Stay warm up there, and don't come to Florida today because it's not going to be any better. It's going to be just as cold up down here.
Okay, and I wish you guys a speedy transit to April. The weather in Florida in April, that's paradise on earth as far as I'm concerned.
It is. You're absolutely right. That's the best.
In April, I can't find a cloud in Florida, which is beautiful.
That's a good time to be here.
Anyway, thanks for having me on, and maybe we'll talk sometime in the future.
I hope so. Yeah, write another book, another bunch of stories. Thank you so much. I'm going to finish this one, by the way, before we give it away. Thank you for being on the air with us, Joe.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
We'll be right back.